How I screwed over an anti-race, horrible, bigoted business owner and likely resulted in him going out of business faster. Posted by Reddit admin Dumb87. This occurred in a southern state. I won't mention the state cause, well, you'll see. I was an account manager for a digital marketing company. We sold lead generation services to business owners to generate leads. One of our key selling features was, if you turned on call tracking numbers plus recorded phone calls, we'd guarantee you X amount of leads based upon Y spend. And if we failed to meet that, you'd be entitled to partial, or if we really failed, potentially full refunds. Some things to know about advertising. A CTN is a call tracking number. It's a unique number that's assigned to a certain point of advertising that consumers call. This number is only on that piece of advertising. It routes to the business line, and unless the consumer is very observant, they have no idea that they're using a CTN. Call recording. If you turn on CTNs, we can record the calls and store the audio on our servers. The business has to consent to this. Also, when you call, you'll hear a message. This call is recorded for quality assurance type message. Both of these are required to be eligible for our service guarantee. Story time. Part 1. The lay of the land. The business in question was a small dad and son contracting company with a couple employees. They primarily focused on smaller jobs, such as windows, drainage, finishing, and so on. Unfortunately, this business owner was a royal pain in the butt. He went back years and his account was filled with nothing but complaints. Also, there was a strong suspicion that he was anti-race because his last account manager was African American. The business owner, who we will name Scott, refused to ever meet in person with the previous manager. Also, I was white. He had no issues finding the time to sit down with me and tell me how crap our service is. Well, it's coming up to due contract renewal, and he says we aren't producing his leads, and he wants to put in a claim for failing to meet our service guarantee. I spoke to my manager about this, and he said he wants me to listen to his calls, write a detailed report, and present my findings to the manager. The manager is worried this may end up in court due to the dollar amounts involved. Nearly a whole working week of hours. I probably spent dang near 40 hours on this, and I wrote a detailed 24-page report outlining the results of our advertising. To say that I shredded this business owner's business practices is an understatement. The report was a straight-up attack on his poor customer service skills, disorganization, inability to execute, and complete and total failure of anything resembling any sense of standard business practices, well, that just make logical sense. I will share with you a few examples of the types of calls I listen to. Small calls where multiple phone calls are truly epic in their total incompetence. Customer 1. I was a small-time landlord who had 3 different properties that had received a quote from Scott for work. The landlord had accepted Scott's quote and agreed to do business. In one voicemail message, offered to pay a deposit to start work. Throughout 4 voicemail messages, this poor landlord went from, "Hey, I want to pay you," to "Are you okay?" to "Why the heck aren't you returning my calls?" Yes, I said voicemails. Scott had gone out to this man's properties, quoted his pricing, and then straight up refused to do anything more. Why? I legit got no idea. I called the customer in question and said I was a quality assurance agency and was doing a survey on Scott's performance. The guy ended up paying Scott's competitor about 15% more to do the work and was utterly beside himself on why Scott ignored him. I was also confused. FYI, all my calls were recorded and put into the company records. Customer 2. This one in particular really ticked me off. Again, the public housing office called Scott to get a quote on work that involved 25 different homes. Scott was kind enough to answer the phone this time, which ironically was one of the few freaking times he ever answered the phone. Initially, Scott sounded happy to get such a big profitable job. Then Scott learned 2 things. It was Section 8 housing, and it was a neighborhood that was African American and Hispanic. Immediately upon learning this, Scott informed the housing office that, unfortunately, he's super booked, not true, and that this area is actually out of his service area, not true again, and the housing office was confused, and they were like, so you're not interested in bidding? And Scott said, no, I'm not, and hung up. He didn't even say goodbye. So I did a quality assurance call to the housing office, and the lady was completely confused why Scott wasn't even remotely interested in the job. Luckily for Scott, the lady didn't connect that Scott was an anti-race jerk, cause discrimination against a protected class is a crime. Customer 3. It was an overseas phone number from Japan. A service member stayed up late to call Scott during his business hours. This person told Scott he was deployed overseas. Still, over the weekend, someone broke into his home back in the States, where Scott operated out, and he was trying to arrange for a new door. He mentioned this was an emergency, as his wife was being forced to stay at a hotel. Scott never returned his calls, nor made any effort to contact him on the email he provided, nor called his wife, who was local. It was a super easy job that Scott could have done in about an hour or so and made a solid profit. I think that's enough examples. Part 2. Review and plan. The actual report at the end said out of the X phone calls, Scott failed to properly service the leads in about 70% of the cases, and that I could keep on going on. Still, I felt X number, a clear trend had been established. It wasn't that our service wasn't producing leads for Scott, it was that Scott was an anti-race, bigoted jerk who everyone freaking hated. Obviously, I said that in more professional language. When I presented the report to my manager, he looked at it and went, "Dang, 24 pages. I asked if it was fine, and he smiled and said, "I got a pretty good idea of what this is going to say." He said he'd review it and get back to me. So, a day later, he came to me and said he'd gone over the report, and the VP had gone over the report, and he asked what I thought the recommended course of action should be. My recommendation? Remove all discounts, charge Scott total price for our services, and clearly explain that our job is to provide him with leads. It's his job to sell those leads. If he can't convert our leads into business, that's not our problem. Scott was getting a 70% discount. Our price was built with discounts in mind, and my manager was like, he'll probably cancel. And I asked my manager, and is that a problem? If Scott was going to remain my client, he was going to pay dearly for that privilege. If he wasn't willing to pay, I was happy to let him walk. My manager smiled and said, nope. Part 3. The meeting. My manager and I called Scott and arranged a meeting. I created a PowerPoint summarizing my findings. About a third of the way through, Scott gives in and tells me just to get to the point. I knew this was going to be a heated meeting, so I wanted my manager present both as a support and a witness. So I explained that it's our job to bring him leads and it's his job to sell them. His failure to do that is not our problem. He gets irritable and whiny, and my manager backs me up. He goes, "Fine, I'll renew my contract at the same rate." To which I go, yeah, you see, you didn't let me get to that part. We have new pricing for you." Scott goes, "Yeah, lower?" And I go, oh no, not lower." My manager smirked, and Scott asked me for the new rate. I hit him with the full rate, which was 3 times what he was paying. Scott is furious with me, says I'm overcharging him, says I'm ripping him off, says I'm a horrible salesperson. He tells my manager that I should be fired for treating him like this. My manager looks at me, and I had been waiting for that moment. Truth be told, I gave 0 craps what Scott thought of me. If anything, my goal was to get him to cancel. "Scott, you're a challenging client, therefore the pricing of our service needs to reflect the challenge of providing you service, so we will be charging you our full rate. If you like, I'd be happy to go over why this ROI still makes sense based upon our past performance." This was wording I had gone over with my management before using it. My manager felt it was fine. I felt so amazing to say those words. It was the nicest way I could say, "You're a jerk. If I'm going to work with you, it's got to be worth my while." Scott says we are a bunch of greedy freaking jerks. He says I'm going to cancel. To which I said, "Well, that's an outcome that we've decided is acceptable if that's what you choose to do." Scott huffs and goes, "What about my refund?" Dismayed, I go, "Scott, we've clearly demonstrated we did our part. The reason why you aren't bringing in sales is because of your company's inability to close on the leads that we generate." To which Scott goes, "So you're saying that I don't know what I'm doing?" To which I say, "Scott, if you agree to sign at the new rate, I'd be happy to sit down with you and to help you free of charge on how to improve your sales techniques and close more of your leads." This is me telling him that he doesn't know how to run his business and was very much meant as an insult. Scott goes, "Nah, screw you, I'm calling my lawyer." And I go, "So I take it you're not going to renew?" He says, heck no. And my manager goes, well, that's fine. Would you like us to email you our report on your leads? Scott goes, sure, I'll show my lawyer. FYI, we never heard from Scott's lawyer. We wish Scott a good day and he leaves. Later, we wrote him an email, attached the report, and also told him that if his lawyer would like the recording in question, we can send that file over as well. Our bases were covered, and we knew it. I suspect he also came to the same realization, but had too much pride to admit that. Part 4. Make sure that dagger is nice and deep. A few weeks go by, and my manager says that we gotta shut down his account, so I need to call him and ask what he wants to do with his CTN numbers, which we control. In our contract, we say at the end of the agreement, the customer has the right to have the numbers ported over for a fee. It would have been normal to waive the fee as a gesture of goodwill, but Scott desired zero goodwill and he received what he desired. I tell my manager, there's no way I'm porting the numbers for free, and just like his quote, I'm charging him the full rate, $15 a number. The total came out to just a bit over $100. So I call Scott, I get his voicemail, but he doesn't answer. I write him a registered letter, and in that letter, I outline that he has 30 days to respond. We have his CTNs, and if he's willing to pay a $15 per number port fee, we'll transfer those numbers over to his phone provider. One morning, I woke up to about a dozen hateful text messages in which Scott told me to go frickin' burn in heck. I took that to mean that Scott was not interested in porting over his numbers, and I reviewed those texts with my manager. We saved those messages and uploaded it to his account. So, is that all? Of course not. Part 5. But wait, there's more. So here I was with 7 CTN numbers that had been in service for literally years. Those 7 numbers were saved in Scott's customers' phones, and to many of Scott's customers, those numbers were Scott's number. Obviously, they wouldn't be advertised to anyone, but that doesn't mean they won't produce phone calls. Now, if I just let the numbers die, the customers will call and simply be told this number is no longer in service. Now, I'm not entirely sure if what I did was legal, but it's been quite a few years, so I feel comfortable about introducing you to Bobby. Bobby was another Southern boy, but as much of a butthole as Scott was, Bobby was a sweetheart. His mama would bake me pies for our meetings, and he was a complete joy to work with. Bobby also owned a similar business to Scotty, but Bobby's business was more advanced, did more types of jobs, and also serviced the same area. So I submitted a service request to port all of Scott's 7 CTNs to Bobby's account, and I waived the fee. So all of a sudden, hundreds of Scott's customers would think they were calling Scott, but they'd get Bobby. Bobby had all his calls routed to his secretary Ashley, who was an angel. Ashley was also a wickedly talented saleswoman, and I know for a fact that she'd be able to take Scott's clients and convert them for Bobby. So that's what I did. I had those 7 CTNs ported over to Bobby. This did a few things that benefited nearly everyone involved. Bobby got more business. I produced more leads for Bobby, which means Bobby was comfortable with spending more money with me, which meant I made more money, and Scott's old customers got better service. Part 6. Capitalize on my revenge. At the next performance meeting with Bobby, Bobby was very pleased with the sudden uptick in new customers. He even asked me, "What did you do to my account?" I smiled and said, "Well, I reviewed your account and made a few tweaks. Have you seen any improvement?" He absolutely did. He asked me, "Did this cost me anything extra?" And I go, "Nope." He ended up increasing our spend with us by about 40% on additional services. I Googled Scott's business about a year later. He wasn't in business anymore. Wonder why? No, my company never caught on to me porting over the numbers, and I strongly suspect that our legal department would not have been pleased. You know, you gotta love it. The bad guy gets ousted out of here, his customers get a nice, awesome guy who's gonna clearly just do awesome work, and then OP gets a bunch more, 40% more bonus money to his company, and it all works out, and then the bad guy is not even in business anymore. This is true pro-revenge right here, and way to go, OP. Military Revenge Story, posted by Von Scranhammer. This was back in 2013 when I was based in Holland, the British Marine for context. I had been married to my wife for a little over 18 months when I deployed to Afghanistan. My wife had gotten a job in the British delegation on base and got to know pretty much every Brit and their husband and wife. One day, we were directly targeted by a vehicle-borne IED. Now, while it wasn't uncommon for there to be a threat to coalition forces in general, being directly targeted felt more personal for obvious reasons. That was also the day I found out about an RAF guy back in Holland had tried it on with my wife. I found him on Facebook and, still feeling rather raw about Terry trying to blow me up, I messaged him words to the effect of, "If you go near Mrs. Von Scranhammer again, I will put glass in your throat the next time I see you." The next day, one of my bosses, who was also RAF, messaged me on Facebook to say that this guy had been over to his office and basically tattled on me. He gave me a friendly warning and heads up that this guy could have gone to the MPs, military police, and reported me. I have no idea what would have happened, but I acknowledged the warning and said it won't happen again. My boss had my back and actually told him to wind his neck. Fast forward to when I got back from Afghan. A few days had passed and I was starting to settle into a, quote, normal life again. My wife brought it up, after explaining that she didn't mention it at the time due to my reaction the first time, that an Army Sergeant Major had tried to message her via Facebook. He told her that she was beautiful and wanted her number. She promptly blocked him. I was ticked off to say the least, but I understand why she kept it until I was back on home soil. The next day, I went into our department and spoke to my other boss, an Army captain, and I told him what had happened, and he said, "Leave it with me." He basically had a chat with him and nothing came of it. I felt deflated and even more ticked off. That was until our senior military officer came into our department. He welcomed me back and asked how my tour was. Still ticked off, I said, "Well, it was good, sir, with the exception of Sergeant Major D-Bag trying to get round my wife." He was, understandably, a little taken aback. About an hour or so later, he emailed me saying that he feels the need to do something official about this. Something I had forgotten was that the Colonel and Sergeant Major belonged to the same regiment, so having one of his own behave like this had clearly gripped him. I told him the full story and provided screenshots of what Sergeant Major D-Bag had said to Miss Von Scranhammer. For this to go official, my wife had to provide a statement. Unfortunately, Miss Von Scranhammer is very non-confrontational and said that she didn't want this to continue. I respected her wishes of not wanting to provide a statement, but hatched a plan that would be 3 years in the making. The timing is important. I emailed the Colonel and said that Miss Von Scranhammer has declined. However, I felt the need for some formal recognition, so I asked that Sergeant Major D-Bag write a letter of an apology addressed to both my wife and I, which is to be signed and dated. This was granted and I received the letter 2 days later. It said, "Lance Corporal and Miss Von Scranhammer, I am writing this letter to you both to apologize for the torment and the anxiety that you both must have felt from my messages that you'd received from my Facebook account. To Mrs. Von Scranhammer, nobody should ever be in a situation where they worry about going to work because of who may come through the door, especially so when they have the added stress of a partner being operationally deployed at the time. The anguish that you must have felt at this time is immeasurable, and for this, I apologize. To Lance Corporal Von Scranhammer, being operationally deployed is stressful enough without the added stress and worry about family back home. Support from home and loved ones is what carries many people through tough times while on tour. For any undue angst I caused, I apologize. I regret any hurt and anguish caused by this issue and apologize wholeheartedly and unreservedly to you both. Signed, Sergeant Major D-Bag." I now waited. I saw out the rest of my time in Holland, moved back to the UK to my new base, and waited some more. Almost 3 years after I received the apology letter, I looked up Sergeant Major D-Bag's wife on Facebook. I had known the whole time we were out there that he was married and his wife lived back in the UK, and he has routinely tried to cheat on her. I sent her the same screenshot which I had sent to the Colonel. I also, before leaving Holland, printed off the emails between the Colonel and myself where I requested the apology letter. I blanked out the Colonel's details and sent the pictures of that. And then, lastly, I sent a picture of the apology letter, signed and dated by her husband admitting what he had done. Once I saw she had read it, I blocked her, blocked Sergeant Major D-Bag and all his friends who had also been out in Holland at the same time. Why 3 years? I remember him saying, before he turned into a D-Bag and tried it on with my wife, that he only had 3 years left to serve. If my timing was correct, he was months away for completing his 22 years and receiving a very nice pension. If his wife decided to go ahead with divorce, she would take half of said pension, which would essentially screw him over for the rest of his life. Ooh, man, that was nasty. It started off kind of chill, like, okay, he's going to get some decent pro-revenge, and then by the end, he just drops the freaking hammer. Oh my goodness, I am taken aback and surprised by this resolution. Are you? It's literally insane. Force me to deploy, I'll destroy your career, posted by Sheba Was Talking. Let's go back a few years. I was a combat engineer platoon sergeant. We had recently gotten a new company commander who thought his crap didn't stink. My first interaction with him was when I got back from running at M240B range, where I was told that he wanted to speak to all leadership immediately in the conference room. Well, it took 3 hours for him to arrive, and despite First Sergeant calling many times, he insisted we stay. The entire meeting was him bragging about himself and saying that he was trying to get the company slotted for a deployment to the Middle East, as well as how excited he was to go. I spoke up and basically said he's a dummy, but with more words, which ended the meeting and got me a stern talking to and thinly veiled threats. This captain had been in for 15 years and never once been deployed. That takes effort and a lot of figurative sucking up. He only wanted to go now because he was up for major. It turned out Brigade had a mission and asked for volunteers. Captain Dummy volunteered me to go despite knowing I had gotten married a week earlier. I made it very clear that I did not want to go to the higher-ups. I was told it was between myself and the captain. Well, a month out, my sister-in-law took herself from this world immediately after she miscarried at 33 weeks. Found them both in the basement of their house. Well, Captain Dummy didn't care. No leave, and I was still to leave about a week after the funeral. Screw him. I walked in to talk to the command sergeant major and was immediately dropped from the deployment. But the captain was so far up the battalion commander's butt that nothing happened to him. After about 8 months later, Captain Dummy got his wish. Headquarters platoon and one other was slotted to deploy. Of course, because I had the most combat experience and most deployments in the platoon, he naturally decided that's why my platoon should go. Now, in order to deploy, you first have to go to a month-long field exercise where you're graded on performance. This generally applies to the higher levels of leadership. By this time, I was just ticked. So I got my squad leaders together and improvised a few missions. First, everyone was to follow the CPT's instructions as literally as possible, the captain, no matter how dumb, and not to give any advice. This led us to getting absolutely destroyed in training, which was glorious. Secondly, and most importantly, was the psychological aspect. So, this dummy commander would go to bed nightly at 2100 hours, no matter what. In the deserts of California, you can find all sorts of creepy crawlies to slip in a sleeping bag while sprinkling juice on his uniform. They'd also periodically hide some of his gear or render his rifle inoperable. So for days this went on. Poor guy slept very little because I ensured his tent was set over top of a beehive. These bees hated any vibration and loved juice, and the dummy never realized why he was constantly getting stung. As we were to be falling under a new brigade, I had to go meet the higher-ups, and wouldn't you know it, the colonel we were set to fall under, turned out, had been my first company commander, who I got along great with. I pulled him aside and called up my squad leaders, where we basically told him Captain Dummy was going to get somebody killed, pointed out his erratic behavior and overall poor performance. Needless to say, he was quickly relieved of command, a career killer, and sent back to work in an office where he belonged. As for myself and my platoon, I still didn't want to go, but the new company commander was my old platoon leader for my second deployment, plus I couldn't let my guys go without me. Turned out it would be my last deployment as some injuries forced you out of the military, but everyone came back alive. Now what could make this pro-revenge even crazier other than completely dismantling this guy's career? What if he'd been allergic to bees? Seriously, like you have him over top of a beehive, they love the juice, they're just going bzz, 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 and just stinging him to death, and he's allergic to him maybe. I don't know. If he was, that'd be a nuclear explosive revenge. But OP, you did what you wanted to do, it was brutal, and you got the job done, even though you still ended up having to go. What do you think? Crappy bosses mess around and find out. Posted by Onaplinth. I had a job working warehouse and delivery for a store. The entire corporate structure was built on treating the people below you like crap, and that was passed down through every level. Managers would just bark orders and chew you out for any reason they could think of. They paid about 25 cents over minimum wage, and the bosses drove BMWs and Mercedes. The big boss lived in an $8 million house. Our store was the freight hub for 4 others in this little chain, so we got to know the drivers from the other stores well, as they were always coming to load freight or to drop stuff off. One day, we're sitting with 2 drivers from another store, and Buddy remarks that he and his partner are working over 60 hours a week. I say, well, he must be doing okay with all that overtime pay. He says they're not getting overtime, just paid a straight time rate. I ask him if he signed an averaging agreement, and he says no. He shows me his pay stub, and there it is. His partner comes back and confirms all this, and they've been doing it for months. He'd asked his manager about overtime and been told that straight pay was just the way it worked. I tell them that's illegal and urge them to take it to the labor relations. They're both reluctant to rock the boat, figuring they'll be fired. So I drop it. We never got any overtime. Our warehouse was busy, but our store wasn't. A couple months later, they're in again, and Buddy's partner tells us that he and his girlfriend are moving back east, and he's giving his notice. I tell him again to file a complaint, nothing to lose now. So he does. A few weeks go by, and when I come in one day, there are expensive boss cars parked all along the loading dock. My workmate says something big is going down. All the managers have been summoned and are inside with a bunch of people in suits. So we wander upstairs to see what's going on. The company bookkeeper had an office in our store and handled all the payroll. He was a Chinese immigrant, nice guy. The bosses were trying to pin this on him, saying he didn't speak English very well, which was true, and had obviously screwed everything up. Turns out he was a pretty cagey guy. He knew what they told him to do was illegal and was able to produce all the records of him telling them that and of them telling him to basically just shut up and do it. He hands it all over and quits. I see Buddy with a new partner a few weeks later. He's got a pay stub for about 15 paychecks worth of earnings. Company got caught for all the overtime pay and a pretty substantial fine on top of that. Added bonus, the second in command had driven over a nail when he parked his silver BMW on the loading dock and had a flat when he came out of the store. He opened his trunk and called me over and said, "Change that for me." I told him, sorry, it's not my job, and if I hurt myself, my compensation claim would be denied. As he went in to call a tow truck, I stood on the loading dock and gazed upon all the havoc I had wrought, and my heart was glad. The thing you gotta love about this is they're literally doing something illegal by not paying the working class people who need that money, who work their hardest every single day, and screwing them over, all while they are being rich and having all the fun in the world, illegally. Way to go, OP. 2 for the price of 1, posted by Golthing Dan. So I was laid off. No big deal, right? It happens. But in this instance, it's a little different. I was working at a tech startup and was one of the early employees. I was one of the key people to develop their technology, which significantly helped them enable to raise tens of millions of dollars. I was told early on that they would basically take care of me as the company grew. Well, for a time at least, the company grew leaps and bounds. Again, much in part to the excellent tech I helped develop. Yet the company had little concern for little old me. Meanwhile, they brought on a bevy of new managers and high-level people, and yet my career was basically stagnant while I was there. But then, things started to slow down due to economic conditions. There'd been a couple of layoffs, and I figured it was probably time to leave the sinking ship. So I lined up a new position at another company. I then went into my manager and told him that it seemed like more layoffs were imminent and that I had secured a job offer at another company. I asked him if it would be a good idea if I should take it, and he said that he would let me know. A couple of days later, after he had discussed things with our CEO, they said I was okay and not to take the other position. I turned down the other position because I had invested so much of myself into this company, even having sold my house and moved hundreds of miles to work at this company. And I still had a lot of stock options that I was hoping would be worth something someday. Literally a couple of weeks later, guess what? Yep, they laid me off. Now, that other position was no longer available, and because this was at the height of the recession, I was out of work for 4 months until I found another position. I could have even lost my house during this time, and I had to sell some cool stuff to keep paying the bills. The new position I finally found was much further from home and was a financial hardship. I would have been better off if they had just been honest with me and told me to take the offer I had had in hand previously. But honesty wasn't ever their policy. Anyhow, before I was involuntarily separated from the company, I was working with a Fortune 500 company that was trying to partner with us on some technology. After leaving, I got wind that they were going to invest $15 million in the company. That bothered me for several reasons, mostly because most of us were pretty sure that the crooked CEO was pilfering the company for personal gain. I'm thinking that this guy shouldn't be rewarded for his atrocious management of the company, and honestly, I didn't think that it would be a wise investment for this large company. I contacted my inside guy at the Fortune 500 and told him some of my concerns about the stewardship of the money at the startup and that it wasn't really a wise investment. This company was looking for a distribution deal for our technology, so I told them the best use of their money would be to make a deal to exchange a large blanket purchase order for stock. This way, the startup company would still get a big chunk of investment money coming in, but they would have to perform for it. It's the difference between giving a kid an allowance for no reason at all, or giving a kid an allowance based on if they did their chores or not. I didn't necessarily want the investors to walk away from a partnership because I had many friends still at the company and didn't want to see them out in the cold. So my thought was that this was a type of deal that would keep the company afloat while minimizing the potential for pilfering and better protecting the investment. All in all, if structured right, it could be a win-win and make it much more difficult for the crooked CEO and his cronies to loot the company. I additionally told them that I wouldn't recommend investing a penny unless they got a seat on the board of directors. That way, they would have first-hand knowledge of some of the shenanigans going on behind the scenes with their money. That was about it. Now they were armed with some additional information and tactics to perhaps better protect their investment, as well as help ensure that if they did invest, everything would be above board. Sometime later, I heard that the CEO pulled the entire company into the conference room and chewed them a new one. He was furious because the investor had somewhat done what I suggested. They had dropped their investment from $15 million to $5 million and had come up with some sort of blanket order or something along those lines. I'm not quite sure, but in essence, it meant a $10 million loss in the mind of the CEO. He's a bit of a fat slob, so it's quite unfortunate that he didn't just have a heart attack right then and there. Not surprising, in the process, the investor was denied the board seat, and one can only guess why, dirty secrets and all. In fact, one of the board members that the CEO did bring on the board had already done time for defrauding his clients. A marriage made in heaven, I guess. So, not necessarily meant as a revenge, but sweet nonetheless. The company basically lost $10 million because of what they did to me. They were all but expecting this money. Had they not laid me off, I probably wouldn't have even thought about putting the investor's interest above that of the corrupt company. In the end, surprising to no one, the investor eventually got majorly screwed by the unscrupulous startup company anyways. The two companies had some disagreements about their distribution agreement, and the investor ended up having to pay a major settlement to the startup company after a contentious mediation. But never fear, don't screw with the Fortune 500. As the startup company was starting to gasp its last breath, they were working on a promising deal with another company they had identified as a major potential customer, one that would put them back on the track to financial success and further line the CEO's dirty pockets. Well, the Fortune 500 company got wind of this deal, bought the other company, and then shut down the deal. That's ninja-level revenge. So, in the end, 2 nuclear revenges for the price of 1. I couldn't have been happier to hear about the karmic justice once again hitting the company. Now, the company is all but dead. all physical assets went to auction. The CEO is milking the last few dollars out of the account, but because our SEC, or Securities Exchange Commission, is all but worthless, he'll start another venture and the cycle will repeat itself. The sad thing is that the CEO, in my humble opinion, makes Elizabeth Holmes, the CEO of Theranos, look like Mother Teresa. I pray that one day they do a Netflix docuseries exposing all that went on at the mess of a company. I can guarantee you it will be quite a hit. Oh, so that's what 2 for the price of 1 means, and it has to do with money and price. I mean, if you're losing $10 million on a deal, that's insane, so much. And then to come back and have somebody ninja level revenge you when you think you're getting back up on your feet again and slap you back from under, chop your knees off, cut your legs, whatever it might be. Wow, we just got 2 for the price of 1. Way to freaking go, OP. Fire me for speaking up, enjoy going out of business, posted by LOL What Mufflers. Many years ago, I worked at an automotive repair shop that was owned by a very nasty person. This person actually had 2 shops that he ran, and the best way I can describe him was as a tyrant. Both shops had cameras, and he would watch us work from the comfort of his home. If he saw something he didn't like, such as taking a 5-minute smoke break or not sweeping for a half a minute during downtime, or if he just wanted to bust balls, he would call the shop and harass us. Or, better yet, at times, show up and harass us in person. In addition, he would regularly berate us for no reason, threaten to not pay us because the shops weren't busy, and would have an absolute meltdown if you dared question his authority. It was spectacular in the worst of ways. After working with him for a few months and dealing with his shenanigans and getting sick of pointless arguments with him, I started reconsidering my employment there. Around the same time, the owner decided to move me from one shop to the other, really for no reason other than likely to try to push me out, as that was what he did with a few people that I'd already worked with. Odd coincidence being that I had not discussed my thoughts of leaving with anyone, but I digress. I genuinely disliked the idea of working at this other shop. It was older and a bit run down, plus it was in a pretty terrible area with high crime. But I wanted to line something up elsewhere before I jumped ship, so I made the move. This is where the beginning of the end started for old Mr. Owner. Once I got settled into the new shop, I got to talking with my fellow technicians. As it turned out, the owner was unsurprisingly an anti-race scumbag, and every single one of the employees at this location, aside from me, was African American. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it's a miracle that the owner came into the shop, said what he said, and walked out breathing. In addition, he would regularly send people home with no pay for the day just to be a butt. This went on for a few weeks, him coming by, being nasty to all of us, and I was over it. And I was just about to leave as I had lined up other employment. The other techs were also over it. I went to give the owner my 2-week notice via phone, discreetly, which I should have known wasn't a great idea. And instead of discussing it like a human, he decided to come down and talk face to face. Well, our friend was so incensed that I put my notice in that he forced me to clock out and go home, and also forced 2 other techs who decided to stand up for me to do the same. I decided that I had enough of this guy's crap, and that not only did he deserve to have some kind of reciprocation against him, but the other techs deserved better than to continually be walked on. So I filed a complaint with the Department of Labor and outlined everything. Within a few days, they launched an investigation, and of course, the owner found out who filed the complaint and called the shop and gave me heck about it, stupidly, because the phones he had were on recorded lines. Guess who I had request to listen to that conversation? In the end, I was terminated by him prior to my 2 weeks being up, as were the 2 techs who stood behind me. I filed for unemployment, which he fought me on by filing appeals with the judge, then not showing up 3 times in a row. This prompted the judge to bar him from requesting appeals against me and granting me full unemployment pay. Months later, I got a written letter from him extending an apology and offer to work for him again. 2 months later, I got a letter from the DOL, Department of Labor, saying that the investigation was closed and that he had been found guilty of multiple charges and was barred from operating a shop or any other business in the state for several years. So this just goes to show, if you're going to be mean to people and not be kind like that, it can and will come back to bite you, destroy your business and your livelihood, put you out of your work and source of income that you own. That is a huge kick in the butt to this guy, and a goodness that's a blow to him. But hey, you can't do what he did and expect to get away with it. Way to go, OP. Fire me from my job with no notice? I'll ruin your entire company. Posted by Acrobatic Ad 2952. So, start of December, I was let go of my job because they didn't have the time to train me for the job role. I needed to take out a loan to survive, as it took me 3 weeks to find something new. I was hired for customer service administrator role, and as I'd never done that type of work, I was told that I'd be given full training on the job. The girls in the office never bothered, and I simply learned the job myself. I was told my performance was more than they expected, but suddenly I was called in the office at 8:30 a.m. when I arrived and told they were really sorry, but they didn't have the time to train me, so I would be let go immediately with no warning or notice, and I was completely shocked by this. To add, my contract stated that I was to be given 28 days notice of termination. The company I worked for uses government grants as a form of payment, so they would regularly claim that they had done certain things they haven't to make more profits from the government, such as forging signatures and lying about what work they've done to gain more funding. Basically, we get funding from the government for providing services to lower income customers. That's all I can say. I was involved in a different department, but shared an office with the department responsible for lying about profits. It's a small company, and the director would constantly hassle them to forge signatures as we can get the jobs through quicker, and if we had an audit, he would go to prison for what was being done. So, when I got laid off, not by a manager, but someone who worked same level in my department, I was absolutely livid that they dragged me in a 60 to 80 minute drive for me to leave 2 minutes later. I got home and immediately called the fraud whistleblower helpline. Nothing came of this until a week later when they wanted more details. The thing is, I'm very good at being silent and taking in my surroundings. I was able to tell them which accounts had been forged and lied about. I also had considerable email evidence of what had been going on. So, long story short, majority have lost their jobs, including the people who couldn't be bothered to train me and went running to the director to fire me, including the director who is now being investigated for fraud and facing time in prison and a massive fine. Always live by the mantra, mess around and find out. Oh, they were not ready for OP to know all this stuff and keep track of all this knowledge and stuff in his head, and then actually drop the bomb whenever the time came, and not just get them fired, but completely just decimate everything. Way to go, OP. Leave me for dead, I'll destroy your fraternity. Posted by 13 Petrichor. After high school ended, I was in a pretty bad place mentally, so I decided to make some extremely unwise decisions during my first year of college. I was basically always on something in order to keep what I later realized was severe depression at bay. For a variety of misplaced reasons, I also decided to join a fraternity. It was a convenient way to keep getting the things I thought I needed at the time, but mostly I just craved human connection in a way that I thought being a brother would bring. Well, I didn't see it for a while, but I was wrong. The fraternity had a house on campus that was allocated to them, but it might as well have been off campus because of how crazy the parties were. Campus police would rarely pass by, let alone come in, no matter how much noise was being made. Still, that made it the perfect place for me. I could let loose and escape the sadness that followed me around during the day without being bothered, and the people there seemed to like me well enough that they at least tolerated my being around so often. At first, it was just official parties on the weekends, and then every weekend, Thursday nights, Wednesday nights, until at one point I was spending hours drinking there every night of the week to hide from myself. Before I knew it, my first semester was over, and the shallow friendships I had made through the bonds of getting ridiculously messed up had started to pay off, or so I thought. They told me they'd be extending an offer to be a pledge next semester. For those that don't know, Pledging is a process that lasts, for this particular chapter of this fraternity, 1 semester and is something that you have to go through to officially become a brother or a member of a fraternity. I was ecstatic. My second semester rolls around and I'm given the invitation in traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity fashion. Once again, I was ecstatic. The thought that I was actually wanted and valued by these people who I thought had it all figured out felt like it would be the highlight of my year. I never really fit in with most members of the fraternity because other than excess consumption of illegal substances and alcohol, we didn't really have much in common. But I started to look up to these guys. While most of my time there passed me by in a haze of my own creation, the moments that I remembered made them seem like kind, cool, and genuine people. Although most of my friendships during that year were with the people from this particular fraternity, I had made some friends in my own dorm hall as well. One night after pre-gaming in someone's dorm, I was happy for any excuse to start drinking at 3 p.m., a couple girls came up to me. They asked why I was pledging at that particular frat given its reputation. Why someone as nice as me would want to be around people like that. I asked what they were talking about, and they told me that this particular frat house has a reputation as a place where girls shouldn't get too drunk, trying to be as not graphic as possible here. I told them that it must be a rumor that started because of guys who'd already graduated, because there was just no way any of the brothers that I knew would ever do something like that. I second-guessed my sense of belonging for the first time that night, but was too starved for human connection to seriously consider that I might not be making the best choices. Still, a small crack had formed in the facade that I had built around these people. Another night, I overheard a couple of the brothers talking when I woke up to use the bathroom, talking about how they desperately needed members to keep the house and how it was a shame that they had to let me become a brother at the end of the semester because they'd normally never let someone like me in. Fine, I thought, that's how these three feel, but most of the others like me and they actually want me here. Wrong. But my life was in pieces before I got to college, and I was so desperate for friends and a sense of belonging that I was willing to rationalize, anything to keep the lie going. One night, while doing a traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity event, read consuming copious amounts of alcohol to the point of serious risk, for the brothers and pledges only, I did what they expected of me, and, consumed copious amounts of alcohol to the point of serious risk. For anonymity's sake, I won't describe the event for privacy's sake, but I was in and out of blacking out for a while until a certain point when I stopped remembering anything. Over the years, though, some things have come back to me as I've tried to process this experience. I have flashes of being turned over and someone holding my head so I throw up in a trash can and not myself or the chair that I was on. There's a slideshow of me walking down half the stairs. One of the last things that I remember is asking to stay the night in one of the brothers' rooms because I knew, somehow, that I was ridiculously drunk and didn't want to go get caught when going back to mine. He said no. He was my closest friend there. It should have been clear to anyone around that I wasn't safe, but these guys were still giving me crappy light beer instead of water because it's basically the same thing. I'll never get that line, or the laughter that followed, out of my head. Instead of getting me help or even just letting me stay there, one of the brothers just took me back to my dorm. Luckily for me, an RA saw me being brought in essentially over his shoulder and felt like that I was in danger, so she called for help. Even after all these years, the last thing that I remember from that night is answering a knock at the door of my dorm. When I woke up in the hospital the next morning, I was told that I could have died. They described how I acted, and it was clear to me after just hearing about it that I was in danger. My BAC blood alcohol concentration was at 0.37, and there was somehow still more in my stomach that I hadn't thrown up before they pumped it. For reference, alcohol poisoning can cause death and generally shows up around 0.3, while 0.4 is potentially fatal on its own because your heart or lungs can just stop working. My RA almost certainly saved my life. When I was sitting in that hospital bed, I cried. Not because I might have died, but because I felt like my life that was just getting back had fallen apart again. I felt broken and betrayed and profoundly sad that the people I had trusted didn't care enough about me to try and keep me alive. When I got back to campus, I had to meet with the disciplinary officer because of underage drinking, and he questioned where I got the alcohol and who I was with and so on. But apart from that, I just followed my usual routine that I was accustomed to. It was the weekend, so I went down to the frat house. I still don't know why, really. I think I was just numb and going through the motions, or maybe I wanted a sense of normalcy. When I got there, all the feelings of sadness turned to anger. As I told them what had happened, the people that I half-heartedly expected to be happy to see me were more concerned about what I might have said to the disciplinary officer than the fact that I was alive. They were wrong to do that, for the record, because I covered their butts completely. But I was livid. These people, they were supposed to be my brothers, and how dare they leave me for dead? How dare they feign concern for me when all they really want is to protect themselves? I made an excuse that I had just wanted to update them, but was tired and still recovering, so that I could go back to my dorm. I stewed in anger and resentment for hours. I thought about all the things that I had experienced, all the warning signs, and I made a plan. First, I set up a new email account and got the faculty email for the head of the disciplinary committee, calling him committee head now, the full title it's annoying to type out every time. A guy who apparently really hated the presence of fraternities on campus housing. I told him that I was a student who had information about crimes committed by the members of this particular fraternity, and I wanted them gone, not just from their house, but from the school. I also talked to one of the girls who took me aside in my dorm, one I felt that I could trust, and asked if she, or anyone she knew, had experiences, names, or anything. She wasn't willing to step forward personally, but she knew someone who was and helped me get in touch. 3 days later, I met with the committee head at 4 a.m. in someone else's office. I didn't want to be seen because I didn't want anyone to know what was going on or have any heads up. I asked him what he needed to take their house, and he told me. He amended the report I gave to the original disciplinary officer to include 2 accidental mentions of a particularly relatively uncommon alcohol, one this fraternity always uses for their traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity-only drinking events. For what it's worth, that alcohol was actually present, so it wasn't exactly a lie. Apparently, just that much was enough for an investigation and wouldn't need me to be involved any more than I already was, which was something that I insisted on. The investigation merely being opened was also enough that one anonymous tip-off, say, where certain quantities of certain illegal substances were likely to be hidden within that frat house, was also enough for campus police to come knocking, with real police in tow, to tear that place apart if enough was found the first time. Remember, the house is owned by the school, so as long as the school gives the police permission to search, and they have enough reason to, they're good to go. I also got him in contact with the brave girl who was willing to come forward with her story. I don't know if she ever got real justice, but I do know that one member of the frat suddenly dropped out between the first time that I met with committee head and when the police came. I hope she did. I made myself scarce around the frat house for a month or so with the excuse that I needed to stop drinking. I didn't stop, at least at that point, because I needed some reason for my distance. Even though I wasn't around as often as I once was, I did spend enough time there to put various amounts of illegal substances in places that people wouldn't look until the time was right. I've never been a rich guy, so it wasn't much, but pretty much every other room had enough for a minor possession charge thanks to my generosity. When the house eventually got flipped and the substances were found, I dropped out because, despite my best attempts to hide it, at that point, most of the brothers were keeping me at arm's length and looking at me with suspicion. It was near the end of my semester anyway, and I had gone from doing fairly well in my first semester to failing most of my classes in the second, so I thought it was probably for the best. I still got to see some of them get dragged out of the house in handcuffs, and it was so worth it. When it was all said and done, the frat house was essentially raided twice. At least 3 of the brothers dropped out while facing serious possession charges that I had nothing to do with. Those were their substances, and the rest of them had to separate, moving into other dorms or already scarce off-campus housing when the fraternity was banned by the school from ever having an official on-campus house for the next decade. Many of them also got minor possession charges on their own, or thanks to me. This was almost a decade ago now, and I don't regret it at all, apart from the fact that I didn't do something sooner. Eventually, I got help for my mental health, and I no longer abuse substances or alcohol to cope with the pain. I also transferred away from that crappy eckhole of a school with just one good semester on my transcript, though I never did get around to finishing my degree because I spent years in a self-destructive spiral and all my money on therapy to pull myself out. I just hope that what I did made it at least slightly less likely for others to be in danger, one way or another, and that all the people who deserved it got what was coming to them. The pessimist in me, well, doubts it, but I like to think that they did. At the very least, I know that fraternity doesn't have any presence at my former school anymore. Seems like it's kinda hard to get new recruits when you lose the only thing you had going for you and your already crappy reputation gets worse. This is a moment where OP finds out that these people weren't really his friends. They were just using him to get what they wanted, even at the cost of his life and health. Literally, possibly life. So he hits them where it hurts with some absolutely nuclear power and just completely destroying their fraternity house and getting them all in legal trouble. Insane job, OP. They screwed me out of my pay, I screwed them out of their company. Posted by Hunting the Wumpus. Many years ago, I got a job with a marketing company during phone deregulation. It was the Wild West, and a lot of small long-distance companies sprang up, all trying to get a piece of the pie. Eventually, they all got bought up by the same bigger fish, but at the time, they were all paying hired gun marketing firms very well to score contracts for them to lock people in. I got a job with one of these marketing firms, a new age capitalism company that insisted we all do yoga and breathing exercises while they rang a little bell and gave us affirmations about how many contracts we were all going to sell and how much money we'd all make. The job was 100% commission, but I was always good at sales, so I looked at the pay scale and noticed that it was exponential, presumably to entice people to work hard with impossible payouts. We were allowed to work as many or as few hours as we wanted, with the payout based on your weekly sales numbers. I decided that I would give it a shot for 1 week to see how much I could realistically make before deciding whether I was willing to put up with the tasteless vegan snacks and mandatory voluntary yoga regime. For the next week, I pushed myself as hard as I could. For 7 straight days, I worked 14+ hour days every single day and used every trick and technique that I had learned doing sales to score as many contracts as I possibly could. I figured this would tell me my maximum possible income and could decide on that basis whether to stay. At the end of the week, I had blown everyone else out of the water. In fact, I had not just gotten more contracts than anyone there had ever seen in a week, I had gotten more than any of them had seen in a month. Because of the exponential scale, I realized that I was making absolutely ridiculous amounts of money, $10,000 and more a week. They had never expected anyone could actually hit those kinds of numbers. Coming in the next week, expecting a huge payday, I ended up with about 5% of what I expected. They told me there were problems with a lot of my contracts and that I would be allowed to fix them and submit them a few at a time over the next several weeks. These problems were things like an apostrophe wasn't quite clear or the dash in someone's phone number was slightly crooked. They were going to screw me. That night, I got a phone call from the company's office manager, Frank, who wanted to meet up for a drink. Curious, I agreed. Over beers, Frank told me that the owners of the company were in a panic because I would have bankrupted them. He said that they spread out all of my contracts on the floor of the office and then they crawled over them, inspecting each one and trying to figure out if I was committing some kind of fraud. When they comprehended that all of my contracts were legit, they decided that they had no choice but to screw me over. Frank told me he realized at that point that if they would screw me, they'd screw him too, and besides, he was tired of doing yoga. He asked me if I would be interested in going into business with him and to go head to head with his bosses. I thought it sounded intriguing, but I asked him how he thought we could compete. Frank explained that he had found out that they didn't actually have the contract for our city. They were acting as independent contractors for another company who had the contract to market the service in an entirely different city. They were poaching here because the person who did have the contract wasn't actively using it. We put together a pitch and approached the guy with the real contract, Joe, and told him about the people poaching his turf. We agreed that we'd split it with him. We'd take the upfront money for each contract and he'd get the back-end money down the road. It was a good deal for everyone, so Joe contacted the phone company and had them threaten the poachers with a big lawsuit if they didn't stop. A week later, Frank and I strolled into the offices of our old employer. Most of the furniture and all the yoga mats were gone. And there was just a table, a couple of filing cabinets, and a file box with the final pay envelopes for everyone. I made a show of counting my money to make sure it was all there, and the two owners, husband and wife, told Frank and I bitterly that they'd had to take cash advances on their credit cards for this money, and asked me if I felt guilty for destroying their lives. I smiled and said nope, and left. Our marketing company made us a lot of money over the year until the company got bought up by Sprint and the gravy train ended. This is huge nuclear revenge because if you work 7 days a week, 14 plus hours a day, that's 98 or 100 greater hours, that is over 2 weeks of regular work, all to just push the limits and work super hard and help that company out. Come to find out, they screw everybody over. They never had good intentions. They just take all money out. Oh, we're bankrupt. Oh, do you feel bad? No, you screwed them over. You want to lie to everybody else that worked there about it, and then you put them on a guilt trip on the way out? Nah, that's nuclear to just completely destroy their livelihood and life of this company. OP, congratulations. Picture this, posted by Beat Me Saber. This happened 12 years ago, and I am still reaping my rewards. I worked for the company. They did 3-phase photography, family and children photography, no wedding or events or anything, just straight up studio work that was in a portable setting. Sittings booked for 10 minutes, and we were supposed to shoot 30 to 50 a day. Yes, it is as wretched of a job as it sounds. It was fast, high energy, and at times simply brutal. 1. Pre-seller. They come in 2 to 3 weeks in advance and sell a special 10x13 portrait and book the appointment. 2. The photographer, that's me in this instance, comes in for about a week and takes the pictures. And 3. The salesperson returns 2 weeks later with the special along with the other 6 poses I took and tries to sell you $400 worth of pictures. I was very good at what I did. The company's sales average was $100 per customer per 50 customers. The more you shoot, the lower your quality because you spend less time taking care of details, and details sell pictures. My average was $175-ish per 150 to 200 customers. I was making this company a lot of money, and they consistently treated me like crap. Oh, the stories. Their business model was shoot as many sittings as you can, as fast as you can. To them, shooting 50 with a $100 average was better than shooting 35 with a $150 average, even though the profit margin was exactly the same. I never agreed with that, and boss and I went round and round about it every week. They withheld raises because I didn't have enough sittings and took my bonuses because I wasn't meeting their quotas. So I figured out how to be fast, efficient, and dang good. That's another post. So that's the background. Now the good stuff. Enter the jerk. The jerk is a pre-seller who lied to the customers, lied to the store, and would book appointments from 9 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. even though the studio hours were 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. He told every lie in the book, and I think he even added a few of his own. Want to bring your dog? Family of 15? Sure, bring 5 changes of clothes and I'll even have her do your makeup. I don't even do my own makeup. Come and get your picture taken and we'll throw in a free toaster. And just to make it interesting, he would triple and quadruple book appointments, and when he ran out of those, he would sell open appointments and tell people to just come in anytime and my photographer will work you in. Oh, just writing that makes me mad after all these years. The biggest problem was he would waive the sitting fee or just not tell him. I was obligated to collect that $8. Every time I didn't, it came out of my check and it was a freaking nightmare. I refused to work behind the jerk for these and 1,000 other reasons. I told boss that if they ever put me behind the jerk again, I would quit. Which is exactly what happened. They knew he had been working at the store I was assigned, and they lied about it. I immediately called boss and told him this was my last week and that he needed to make arrangements to get the photography equipment at the end of the shoot. I should have walked out, but I was young and dumb. It was a 3-day shoot, and I shot 316 customers by myself. That is an insane amount of sittings, and nobody was happy. Every night, the store manager had to tell my customers to leave because the store was closed. People were lined up at 9 a.m. waiting for me. I took so much abuse that week. After a customer threw a shoe at me and another spit on my pizza, the store security guard brought a chair over and he stayed with me almost the entire time I was there. I honestly can't remember how many people were escorted out of the store because they acted a fool in my studio. It's been over a decade and I still have nightmares about that week. But nobody came to get the equipment, so I start making phone calls and plotting. I say, hey, so what do you want me to do with your equipment? Boss says, you're gonna need it next week in Florida. No, because I quit. You didn't give me any notice, so I am not accepting your resignation. I am sending you to Florida next week. Hey, I'm an independent contractor, remember? You can't make me go to Florida. This is not complicated. I quit. And that's another post. Just go to Florida. I don't have any time for this now. You can quit in 3 weeks if you can hire a replacement. And he hangs up. Nope, not going to Florida. I packed the equipment and took it home with me. The camera was a brand new Canon T2i 550D, and those were pricey back in 2010. I really didn't want to give it back, but it wasn't mine to keep. I had an idea. Boss was an absolute train wreck of a human. If he didn't want to do something, he wouldn't. If he could find someone else to do it, he would. I decided to use his own worst traits against him: avoidance and procrastination. The next thing I did was take the company credit card and go to the nearest storage unit with climate control. I rented a unit and paid for the first month, but just one. I unloaded it all, down to the last halogen light bulb. I took detailed pictures of everything and an inventory. I locked the door and I walked away. At this point, there was nothing I could do but wait and hope that Boss would continue to be the worthless wreck I knew him to be. Next, I called and reported the card stolen. Why? Well, because I knew if I didn't, that card would remain active and rent would be paid every month on time, and that just wasn't going to work for me. I cut it in half and sent it and the combination to the storage locker to Boss via FedEx, along with a hand-painted sign that said, "I quit." I also sent an email to HR telling them that I was terminating my contract and that Boss had the information on the equipment. This is probably the only sketchy thing that I did. The person I emailed was out on medical leave, and I knew it. I could have sent that email to a dozen other people who work there, but they might have paid attention to it. By the time she got back to the office, she had so many emails she couldn't even begin to tackle them all. A month goes by and the police knock on my door. Okay, so I wasn't expecting that. The company has reported the equipment stolen and the police are there to investigate. I really thought I was going to jail. The cop that knocked on the door was fully expecting to take me away in handcuffs until I explained what was going on. I ended up taking copies of the emails to the police department, as well as my copy of the contract with the storage unit. I also had a copy of the shipping label. Both my name and the company were listed on the contract. I had to make an official statement and jump through some hoops, and the company had placed a monetary value of $12,000 on the studio rig, so potentially I was in a lot of trouble. Except I covered my butt. The police told me I was in the clear because the storage unit had their name on the contract, their credit card was used to pay for it, and I had sent the combination and all the pertinent information to the company. I am very good at CYBWP, cover your butt with paper. At this point, I figure the gig is up, because surely they're going to come and get this rig or send someone or something. Nope, Boss is still worthless. 2 more months go by. I get a call from the storage facility and they're about to cut the lock and auction the contents. I just about peed my pants, I was so excited. I called Boss again and he dodged my calls and ignored my emails to please call me immediately. I never specifically stated what I wanted to talk to him about, and just like I was hoping he would, he ignored me. Okie dokie, I've done all that I can. And that's when it all started to come together. And then I hit a pretty good snag, but it actually worked out better in the end. In this state, if a storage unit goes up for sale, the owner cannot purchase it at an auction. I didn't know that. But where there's a will, there's a way. They sent letters and called 3 more times, and then the date was set. The unit went up for auction on my birthday. My neighbor went to the sale and he bought the unit for $125, and I almost died. And of course, we were in cahoots on this, but we had to make it look like that we weren't. The pistol grip, the camera mounts cost more than that, not to mention the lighting, the props, and the costumes, and of course the camera. My neighbor then put an ad in the local paper for photography stuff, $1,000 firm, but didn't list anything specific and, oops, I put the wrong number in the ad. A week later, he wanted out of his garage, and then he sold it to me for $126. He has a bill of sale from the auction, and I have a bill of sale from him. It is now mine, and there is nothing the company can do about it. But they tried. I now have a fully functional photography studio, all the contacts I need to start my own business, and the skills to do it. I started calling all the stores I'd worked for the last 8 years and offered them a much better deal than what the company was giving them. I did my own pre-selling, my own photography, and my own sales. Except I took it a step further. I bought a monitor and computer and let people preview their pictures and order the day of the shoot. They paid in full and I mailed the pictures directly to them. People loved it. No high pressure sales, no tricks. My customers were happy and so were my stores. About 6 months after my first independent shoot, I heard from the company. I got several nasty letters from them, which I ignored. Word had gotten back to them that I was using their equipment and that I was working for someone else. I just laughed at them. They thought so little of me that it never occurred to them that it was, well, my business. Then I got a nasty legal letter from a lawyer. It started with cease and desist, rolled into me violating the non-competitor's agreement, and ended with the return of their stolen property. They had apparently not told him all of the facts. I sent him copies of everything. I waited a few weeks for a response from him, and I heard, well, nothing. I finally called to find out what was going on, but no one was available to take my call. How convenient. A few days later, I got a certified letter in the mail saying, no other legal action will be forthcoming from this office. I would have been content to just let it slide, but this whole thing ticked me off and now I wanted blood. I made a real effort to really hurt them. Little by little, I built my business and my reputation. I didn't have to do any of the nasty tricks that the jerk did. Within a year, I had stores and schools calling me. I had more work than I can handle on my own, so I took on a second photographer and then a third. I actually hired 4 people out from under their noses. At the height of my business, I had 8 additional photographers and a full-time office assistant. I could have grown much larger, and in hindsight, I am so glad that I didn't. Digital photography was a huge boon to the industry, and then it backfired. I found my niche in the market just as it exploded. I ran the company completely out of 3 states. They lost all of their chain contracts to me, including the store where it all blew up. The jerk lost all of his stores and ended up working at a gas station. The boss ended up demoted because his district was dissolved when I sniped out the contracts. The jerk actually tried to convince one of my photographers to hire him to do the pre-selling for her. By now, my name and my business name had a really good reputation. Boss left the company for good and used me as a personal reference. He was a good photographer, just a rotten manager. And I took great joy in telling the people who called me that I was legally not allowed to tell them what I thought of the man. The age of the cell phone camera pretty much destroyed traditional photography, and I closed my doors as a business in late 2017. The company closed for good in 2016, and I would like to think that I had a hand in that. I'm still standing, and they are nothing but an empty building. I still have that original rig, but the camera has been replaced several times. I do senior pictures and the occasional venue shoot. Most of my photography is for restaurant menus now, and well, people ask me if that's boring. I've never had a meatball scream and cry or kick me, which is pretty much a daily occurrence when you work with kids. This may not be as epic as some on here, but I beat them at their own game, and that still feels pretty dang good. Hey, OP, I don't know how you think that's not as epic, because it starts off with like, hey, you got revenge because you went out and you did your own thing. Oh wait, you sniped their equipment. Oh wait, you bought it legally from your friend at an auction who had a plan to make it list out like a month, and then you come back and get it, and then boom, you start your own business, you snipe out from under them, and if that is not enough, you completely just wreck their whole business. You get in and out as the time is right, and then slip out as digital photography comes in. This is layers and layers and layers of revenge. And that is why I truly believe this is a pro, if not nuclear revenge. Am I alone in this, or do you think this is pretty freaking wild? Because I know that I do myself. Landscaping owner rips my friend off for $400, so my friend makes him incur $15,000 in expenses, posted by 3 Nations. Word of note, this is not me, but posting it up here for a friend who currently resides overseas. Long story, but worth the read. A while back, my friend was selling some stuff online, and among the items was a water heater. You know, the ones you see in every community hall and church kitchen. It was in working condition, and he threw it up online for $150, and he got an email from a person who runs a landscaping business saying he'll give him $100 cash today. Done. 2 weeks later, he got an email saying that it's not working. Weird. So my friend offered to give a full refund or cover repair cost if it's under $100. The guy instead sent an invoice for $400 saying the repairs had been done, and if my friend doesn't pay it in 48 hours, he'll send a debt collector after him. He paid it out of fear and emailed the confirmation. The landscaping owner then emailed back saying, "This is the price you sometimes have to pay when selling secondhand electronics," followed by a "Have a great day, don't let this hold you back," with a smiley face at the end of the email. A month later, my friend was in a bar and he overhears a girl talking about how her boss, who runs a landscaping firm, screwed over some dummy selling a water heater. My friend says, "Oh dang, I gotta hear this. Do you mind if I join your table?" And the girl said, "Well, sure," and told the story. Her boss had brought a busted water heater from a secondhand store for $25 and a working one for $100 and billed the seller for the repair for the busted one before he sold it on for $300 to some community group. My friend asked, "Who did this so I don't hire that guy to fix up my yard?" And everybody's just laughing all around. She says the company name, and lo and behold, it's on the email of the guy my friend sold the water heater to. He was the dummy in the story. He told me he was pretty angry about it, but COVID then hit, so he had other stuff to worry about. 18 months later, he was browsing the website he originally sold the water heater on, and he saw a bunch of landscaping materials: shovels, gardening stuff, wheelbarrows, lights for working at night, drills, nail guns, some construction materials, and a generator. Now, in my friend's location, apparently, if you're selling a generator, then you need to have a warrant of fitness for it, proving that it works, it's safe, there's no flayed wires, and so on and so on. Most people ignore it, and he saw that this generator is being sold by the landscaping firm. This generator, he said, just by looking at it, there was no way in heck it would have a warrant of fitness. Word of note, failure for a business to provide a warrant of fitness upon request for a generator after 2 weeks, when reported to the official departments and enforced by the court, the punishment is a hefty fine, and the courts often force the seller to refund the affected party and pay any costs that they incurred. evilplottingmusic.mp3. He talked to his flatmate, who agreed that they would go 50-50 on the generator, but he would transfer the money. Now, my friend had never met the landscaping firm owner face to face when selling the water heater because he left it outside and the pickup was confirmed via his security camera. And when he gets there, it was clear that the owner, this old grumpy looking man who enjoyed yelling at his employees, had emptied out his storage unit. The owner was very much, as it is, no refund, and the flatmate showed him the transfer confirmation and they take the generator for $800. No warrant of fitness provided. They then took it to a friend of theirs who's an electrician, and he agreed to check it and give an invoice for repairs. And to quote the friend, "It would be cheaper to buy a new generator, and to be honest, this generator, shouldn't have even been sold. It should have been scrapped." They'd also found that the main identifier number had been scratched off, but not a second number that is often recorded as well on the warrant of fitness for tracking purposes. So they got in contact with the seller, telling him the cost for repair, about $5,000. He promptly tells them that he's not paying, as it is no refund, to which they then asked, "Have you got the warrant of fitnesses for this generator?" Silence for 2 days. They followed up with another email asking for it. No response. They then ask again and get an email from him saying that he'll take it back for $800. They said, no, we want the warrant of fitness, and well, they get no response. They emailed him every day for 2 weeks. Nothing. So they printed out the original item listing that had been screenshotted and had been archived on the website, and then they reported him to the website, and then the government. 4 months later, my friend is in court, and the guy went up to him. He tells him that he will take back the generator for $800 and that my friend and his flatmate will be going in to tell the judge that the seller has refunded them and that they want it all dropped. And that's what's happening here. Full stop, end of story. They are doing what they are told to do. My friend said no. So they went into the courtroom and it's over very quickly. The inspector the government sent out to inspect the generator stated that it was in poor condition, shouldn't have ever been sold, was highly unsafe, and that the seller had tried to get the generator a warrant of fitness in early 2021, but instead had been told that it was to be repaired or scrapped and that it was not to be sold. They identified it by a second number on the generator that they took down in the original attempt to get it warrant of fitness, which had not been scratched out like the first. The judge ordered the landscaping firm owner to refund the flatmate the $800, pay the $5,000 for repairs to the generator, and was ordered to pay a $10,000 fine, which would be given directly to my friend's flatmate as the affected party. When they left the courtroom, the owner was furious, and he told them that under no uncertain terms that he was paying them a penny more and that he couldn't understand what he had done to deserve such treatment. To which my friend said, "Hey, remember the water heater?" He gave him a very confused look. "Yeah, remember that water heater that you bought for $100? Well, I do, because I sold it to you, and I know that you had a different one repaired and invoiced me for it." His jaw was on the floor, and to hit it home, he said, "It's a witch, isn't it? When what goes around comes around, especially when it accumulated interest. You have 48 hours to pay, or a debt collector will be contacted. Remember, this is the price you sometimes have to pay when selling secondhand electronics. Have a great day, don't let this hold you back." And they left. He paid the $15,000 2 days later. My friend and the flatmate split the $10,000 50-50 as they agreed with the combination of rent payments and study stuff. The generator they got repaired, and then got a warrant of fitness for it before selling it for $1,000 with a newly replaced identifier number. They then went out for a wonderful dinner and a night out in town. In short, old landscaping owner rips my friend off for $400, so my friend makes him incur $15,000 in expenses. I just did the math, and this is a 37.5 times stupid tax that landscaping owner paid. He thinks he's going to get away with it. He feels good for a while because you lay low, chill out, then you overhear a worker blab out. Look, landscaping guy probably had no idea that this worker was blabbing out this story that probably shouldn't even been told, blowing his cover. Dude hears in the right place at the right time. This all just falls apart so perfectly, and to top it off, OP's friend just has the genius plan to lay it all out, rip him up, and then get a huge payday from it. Way to go, OP's friend. Don't mess with an engineer, posted by Auklemon. I worked for a company that provides specialized equipment used in manufacturing. To protect my anonymity, I'll have to be vague about what exactly this machine does. During my time working in this field, I got to know many clients who would need these machines installed and serviced. One of these customers we'll call Jake. I later left the company for a different job, but Jake apparently kept my number. One afternoon, I got a call from Jake that they wanted a new unit installed and another unit needed maintenance and wanted to know if I was available. I let him know that I left the company, but that I could pass him on to someone who could help. He tells me he'll pay double my current rate to install the unit over the weekend. He lets me know that the company has increased the rates for installation and the company just can't afford it. The instructions they sent over just aren't clear enough, and their engineers are scratching their heads trying to figure it out. He begs me to consider it, and I agree. For more context, installing this unit can take a good few hours or up to a day on your own. The company gives you two options. You can either pay for an engineer to come and install it, or you can save money and they'll send instructions so the customer's own engineers can install it. The instructions, they aren't easy to follow, and it's company policy that if someone has started to install the equipment, the supplier wouldn't get involved since they couldn't verify that any of the pieces were broken. This will be important later. I drive down on the weekend and they show me the boxes of equipment. I set to work and I make good progress installing the unit. Around 6 hours in, and I'm stopped by Jake, who greets me. I let him know that I'm nearly finished, and he tells me, "Hey, sorry, but they just don't have the budget to pay you." He understands my frustration, but his engineers can take it from here. To say that I was frustrated was an understatement. I wanted revenge. There's a small button inside the unit that changes the unit into test mode. This is done to perform maintenance on the unit, but it's impossible to configure the unit with this button pressed. It's only possible to reach this button using a pin, so it's not easily pressed during installation. Because of this, the installation instructions don't mention it. There's no real way of telling the equipment is in test mode, it just won't work normally. I think you can see where this is going. I click the button, collect my things, and leave. Monday morning, I get a call from Jake. I declined. I knew my old company wouldn't get involved since I already started installing the unit. I knew his engineers would never figure it out. I just had to let him stew. A few days later, with many missed calls, I finally pick up. Jake is furious. He asks me where the heck I've been and why I haven't been picking up the phone. He tells me they can't figure it out how to configure the machine and they need my help. I tell him, "Hey, why is this my problem? You won't pay me." He told me he was sorry and they would work something out if I could get there as soon as possible. I told him, "Oh no, you're going to have to pay me 7,000 pounds up front before I do anything." I'd never felt this powerful before. He screamed at me for a bit and hung up. He called back a day later after saying he's sorry for how he acted and said that if I could come fix it, he would pay me in a totally defeated tone. He tried to fight it, saying that he'll pay when I was done, but I was having none of it. After a bit of back and forth, he agrees to pay me. The money hit my account and I came in the next day. The look of confusion over his face when I took out a pen and changed the unit from test mode was priceless. It was even more priceless seeing his reaction to me packing up my tools and leaving after only 20 minutes of configuring. Easiest 7,000 pounds I'd ever made. Don't try to mess with a professional problem solver. I just love how he engineered, pun absolutely intended, a solution here, and it's funny because this is great ProRevenge. Not only did he just completely get the guy who was messing him over, he went in and did it with style, finesse, and fashion, just boop, done, and just dropping the jaws on the floor. The dude never expected, never saw it coming, thought he was getting a complicated, convoluted fix, and then OP just comes in and wrecks everything. Way to go, OP. Enjoy that 7K. You should always pay your accountant, especially if you got skeletons in your closet. Posted by Reddit admin Dumb87. My buddy is an accountant. He has his own firm. His biggest clients are small to medium-sized businesses. Well, he had a client who owned 4 different clubs and bars in 2 different cities. Client was always shady, always slow on payments and so on, and I was also a customer of one of the bars. They had poker games that I would play in on Thursdays. Well, one day I'm at my buddy's house having a few beers and he's whining about non-payment from a client. I ask who, and well, he doesn't want to say. But it's really bugging him because it's a significant chunk of change. He then says the name. We'll call him Scott. I'm like, wow, Scott isn't paying you. And then he says Scott's saying business is way down. And I think that's odd. I've been going to Scott's place and every Thursday is packed. My buddy looks at me and goes, "Really?" I go, "Yeah, he does this new cash discount thing, 15% off of your tab if you pay cash." My buddy goes, "Really?" I tell him about my experience at Scott's bar, and eventually the topic changes. A few weeks later, my buddy calls me up and says, "Hey, you going to Scott's bar to play poker?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Can I join?" And I go, "Well, sure." He joins, we get a few drinks in us, lose our money at poker. My house is closer, so he decides to crash there. On the way over, he breaks down his theory. He thinks Scott is vastly underreporting his revenue. The reason why he suspects Scott is offering cash discounts is because cash is easier to hide. He says he's going to do a deep dive on Scott's finances. My friend tells me his plan is to go to all 4 of Scott's establishments, get the prices he charges at each place, pieces together how much alcohol he's buying versus how much Scott is saying the revenue equates to. He looks up how much Scott is paying in payroll, rent, bills, and so on. Keep in mind, he has access to all this info, and he determines that Scott is basically using his credit card receipts plus a little bit of cash to cover his cost of his business, to include rent, payroll, insurance, liquor, food, and so on. However, based upon the amount of products he's selling, he's suspecting Scott is underreporting his total income by about 35 to 40%. He goes back into Scott's books even more, and he figures in the last year, Scott has been underreporting his sales by 35 to 40%, but he's also been underreporting his sales by at least 20 to 25% for years on end. Simply put, there is no way Scott is going through as much product and as much alcohol as he's purchasing and having the revenue numbers that he's claiming. He's underreporting his sales to his accountant, which means he's also underreporting his earnings to the IRS. By this point, Scott owes my friend thousands of dollars that he hasn't paid. He said his total amount owed could buy a brand new motorcycle. He never gave me an exact number. My friend decides, screw getting repayment from Scott, let's get repayment from the IRS through the whistleblower program. He's estimating Scott's underreported his revenue by millions of dollars over the course of years. The whistleblower fees that he'd earned from the IRS far outweigh the amount Scott owes him. The IRS will pay between 15 to 30% of what they collect. So, with the assistance of a lawyer, my friend gathers all the evidence he has of Scott's underreporting to the IRS and files a whistleblower report with the IRS. During this time, my friend fires Scott as a client for non-payment. Now this part gets boring because there's a lot of legal wrangling back and forth, but however, eventually the IRS comes down on Scott, and they come down hard. It's estimated that Scott underreported his income to the IRS by about $4.5 million. Now, my friend never told me how much the IRS was able to recoup, but Scott's businesses are no longer his businesses, and $4.5 million would put the whistleblower reward at $675K to $1.3 million. Keep in mind, it's based on what the IRS collects, not the amount that's reported. I've asked my friend how much he got in the end, and he simply says, I no longer have a mortgage, and it would have been much cheaper for Scott to just pay me. Oh, you go off and you mess with like reporting your income and revenue, not just for your own personal taxes, but for the business and your items that you bring in and sell and your employees and payroll. You're just not doing one layer. You're doing multiple layer of tax evasion and underreporting. That's going to come back to bite you, as it did with Scott here. I think the moral of this story is do not be Scott at all, like ever, for any reason at all. Way to go, OP. Karen chews us out of her milkshake, I get her fired, posted by Deleted. So I used to work at this restaurant in the downtown city. Terrible job experience, but it was a job. One day, we get slammed. Usually, it's because of a game night since this burger place is right behind the baseball field, but this day was different. First of all, I was already ticked. Coworker who thought he was the manager showed up an hour late, so I had to open the entire front of the restaurant alone within 30 minutes because people were already waiting in the parking lot. Coworker shows up, I don't say a word to him. Oh well, move on with the day. Day goes on, and I come in for my shift. Soccer teams come over after a tournament. I'm talking about 100 players with a line out the door. On shifts like this, some of the kitchen staff had to drop everything and help the other front of house employees, including myself, deliver orders because we're taking orders, cleaning tables, putting orders together, delivering them, serving drinks, and I did this when I was 18, and making milkshakes. Customers were great. All of the players that came in were so nice, and we had no issues, no impatience, no complaints, nothing. Just a nice day. They tipped us nicely as well, so we really appreciated that. I should probably mention at this point that we take DoorDash orders, which is where Karen comes in. For those of you who don't know, DoorDashers are people who are paid by a customer to go get food from a restaurant and bring it to them. We get in our usual rush, and me and 3 other coworkers are obviously multitasking and rushing to keep everybody happy. DoorDash tablet goes off. I confirm it and start prepping the order. Mind you, this included a milkshake. I'm not going to go ahead and make the milkshake because God only knows when this woman's going to show up. Rest of the order's ready to go, and she shows up while we're helping other customers. Now let me tell you about this woman. By definition, a Karen. She had the typical Karen cut with the eyes of a frickin' White Walker. I'm talking bright blue eyes, obviously fake. I mean, they were the Twitter logo blue and almost solid, and they just peer into your soul in a split second. I swear, I saw the gates of hell in her eyes. So I'm just gonna call her Karen. She starts getting impatient and asks me how much longer it'll be. I apologize and tell her that it won't be much longer, and I go to start the milkshake. She starts flipping out at my coworkers, and as I'm passing her to get the rest of the DoorDash order, she starts laying it on me, screaming at me because I didn't have the milkshake ready and that I was costing her tips. The woman was wearing Lululemon yoga pants and had expensive collar contacts in. She would be fine without $3. Sort of manager comes out to talk to her. Let's call him C. C comes out and explains the situation. She doesn't accept what he's saying and starts screaming in front of 200 people about how she won't get tips and how hard it is to make one milkshake. Karen gives us the typical, I want to speak to the manager, and the manager just so happens to be C. He tells her that he is the manager, and he asks her to leave, and she continues her rant, calling C a coward about 5 or 6 times. Karen finally leaves. I'm fuming about this lunatic coming in and making everyone uncomfortable, so I do a little digging. Turns out, if you go onto the tablet, you can find the previous DoorDashers who come into the restaurant to get orders. I remember the name of the customer who ordered, so I go onto the tablet to find the DoorDasher's name. I find her name and the cell phone number on the order history and information. I get into contact with the DoorDash company and explain the harassment that we endured from Karen, and I give them her name and contact number, saying that she was from a certain city. They tell me they'll look into it. They contacted me later and informed me that it was taken care of, and we never saw her again as she regularly took orders from us. We all went on our merry way and occasionally called each other cowards as our own little inside joke. Update, I feel as if we should specify this, but we also got a strongly worded email from this woman stating how ticked she was and blah blah blah, and how she mentioned that she lost her job because of it, and that she knew one of us said something. I mean, duh. Hey look, here's the thing, even if old Karen DoorDasher over here was having a horrible day, as they always happen to have for who knows what reason, right? And then she comes in and takes it out on them without explaining anything, like say, hey, I'm sorry guys, I've just had a bad day. It's not your fault. You just don't want to take it out to you. Things are rough. Karen's not going to do that. Let's just be honest here, right? This is the dead giveaway that the Karen went out the DOOR forever. Nice work, OP. Former manager made my life heck, and I finally got her fired. Posted by Traveling ABC. I was desperate to join a new job after my husband and I were both laid off last year. When I was offered a new role, I knew it would be a step down from what I was doing, but the manager and the team seemed great, and that part has not changed. However, since my manager, Gary, was so busy, he basically offloaded me to another manager, Jane. I was supposed to be the connection point between my team and Jane, but it quickly became Jane micromanaging me. She would ask me to work through lunch, move or cancel vacation days, call at 11 p.m. on weekends, and order me around on phone calls. She also made nasty comments about my weight and said that I was too big for my race. The list of personal slights so long that it filled 3 pages. I would talk back to her, and she did not like that, and that provoked her more. I only stayed because we needed to pay the bills. I mean, I finally had a mental breakdown on a Friday afternoon after she yelled at me for something trivial about scheduling a meeting without including someone from her team who I didn't even know about. I was dealing with a family tragedy. I couldn't take it anymore. I told Gary about the situation with Jane, and he was sympathetic and not at all surprised, considering half her team quit. He immediately offered to move me to a different team under him. I was thrilled. Well, turns out going to the new team didn't help. Jane continued to order me around from afar. When I ignored her emails, she came to my desk one day and started loudly talking about how I am not qualified for this role. Gary overheard and finally told her off, but the verbal abuse did not stop. After 2 months there, I abruptly wrote my resignation letter and stapled a list of Jane's offensive comments and CC'd everyone. Gary offered a bunch of accommodations to try to keep me, but seeing how she was still provoking from afar, I said the only way for me to stay would be for her to go, and he didn't have the authority to let her go. Her manager was in a different country, and despite several HR complaints from at least 5 people, nothing was done. So I left, loudly and without shame, telling everyone exactly why I was leaving. Times were very bad for about 3 months. There were nights that we would eat slices of bread just so we could pay the mortgage and the emergency expenses from a health crisis and funeral. Even after he found a job, we were still catching up on bills and still are. I spent months applying to like 5 or 10 roles per day, sometimes over 20. Last month, I saw a public memo about a big shot from a former company joining the company that I just left. I used to work with this guy closely, and I texted him congrats, let me know if you need any insights on the new place. We had a quick call to where I told him some of the ins and the outs where I thought that they could innovate. After this call, he asked me to join the team as his chief of staff, and I accepted. Imagine Jane's shock when we had our first all-hands call. All the VPs and above were asked to welcome the new Big Shot in a giant conference room. In Big Shot's speech, he breezed over that I'll be his chief of staff, along with a few key names. I now sat 2 levels above Jane, and apparently within the 3 months that I wasn't there, the other half of her team turned over. Every single person left. Gary was excited for me and said all nice things. However, Jane took the classless route and sent Big Shot an email about how I'm an unqualified idiot, that I used to work for her and how I tried to get her fired, and that she suspects that I lied to get ahead. She didn't even try to be fake nice. Big Shot forwarded me her email and asked what this was about. I was so nervous and excited. Little did Jane know, I was a director at Big Shot's competitor company and was already a level above her, so 2 levels isn't a big leap, and I worked with him for 5 years. I had an hour call with Big Shot, and I told him that she was bad for the company culture and was a nasty person in general. But the evidence that he needed was Gary confirming that her whole team had turned over. My prior resignation letter, which was still sitting on my desktop when I logged in upon return, and a few other nasty emails that she sent her recent staff, which they were happy to share with us. Big Shot fired Jane on Friday. How do you think that you can just do all this over and over? Nobody comes at you for a while, so you think you're in the clear to keep acting a Karen, and then all of a sudden somebody new comes in with some power, and you come back with even more power, and then pieces start falling together like a terrible Tetris play when you really aren't good at the game. You know how all the blocks stack up, and then you're like, oh, this sucks, I can't make it win. I've never played this game before. That's the situation here. She thought she had it. She clearly didn't have it. Nobody covered for her, and she just got owned. Way to go, OP. And of course, Big Shot too. Make my coworkers cry? I will help karma turn your life upside down. Posted by Ancient Ice. Backstory. I worked at this hotel for over 2 years and was one of 2 people left that went through the training when our hotel changed hotel franchises. During this training, we were told about certain rules the company had. So here's the cast. The manager is the front desk manager. He was only here for 4 to 6 months at this point. Me, I'm a nice guy, unless you're a bully or an entitled person. And there's a few others that I'll mention as we go through. The story. One afternoon, I was scheduled to work second shift, 3 to 11. I walked in, and both AM front desk coworkers looked like that they'd been massively crying as their makeup was smeared. My manager looking quite ticked. I ask, hey, what's wrong? Manager says, we have a major jerk as a guest. This guy is the highest level on the rewards for the hotel chain. He's very demanding, and he wants free upgrades, free this or that, and he screams anytime he has an interaction with the staff. This guy has made every department call me complaining about him. Now this guy just came to the desk, and he screamed at these 2 coworkers until they were both crying. These 2 ladies were fresh high school graduates and were very sweet and innocent people. They loved helping people and didn't deserve this treatment. As he is explaining this, I look up this guy's room details. Once my manager finishes explaining everything this guy had done, I see this guy's info and I had a smile from ear to ear. I reply, hey, didn't you see that he's an employee of a different hotel? Manager says, yeah, but so what? I replied, well, first off, while you travel as an employee, you're required to behave and be respectful. It's in the fine print on the discount form. I grabbed this form and showed it to the manager. Failure to be respectful can lead to having your employee discount suspended or permanently revoked and even get you terminated. You need to call this guy's hotel and ask for the GM, then explain to him who you are and what this guy is doing. I look up the hotel phone number and call the hotel and then handed my manager the phone. Manager, after his call-ins with the GM, he has an evil and satisfying smile on his face. His GM is steaming mad after I described all the stuff this guy has done. The main switchboard phone rings. I answered, "Hello, thank you for calling hotel name. How may I direct your call?" Caller says, "I want to speak to Entitled Jerk's room, please." I replied, "Absolutely, sir. Have a nice day." Transfer the call and looked at my manager and saying with a sarcastic tone, "Someone wanted to talk to Entitled Jerk. Gee, I wonder who that could be." Manager continues after he stopped laughing. The GM gave me his personal cell phone number and said that if I have any more issues at all to call him immediately. I'm leaving the phone number next to the switchboard. If you need it, call him. I told manager, "Hey, your revenge is done. Now for my revenge." Manager wide-eyed said, "Oh crap, what are you going to do?" Me, smiling a very evil smile, "Hey, you'll see." I pick up the phone to make a call. "Hello, Hotel Rewards customer service. Yes, I would like to report someone using reward account while using an employee discount on his stay." Customer service says, "He can't do that." I replied, "I know, I'm calling to report him." I gave her the guest reservation number and the rewards member number. I continued, "Hey, I bet anything, if you dig through this guy's history, you'll find all his stays are probably at employee discount." Customer service says, "I'm starting a ticket to have this guy's account investigated." I replied, "Thank you." Then hang up the phone. The manager watched as I then remove his rewards number from his stay. My manager had a huge grin on his face. That was awesome. I explained, "Oh hey, I am not quite finished with him yet. It's time to go spread the news to all the departments that he's no longer a rewards member." I made a new key for his room without concierge access. I walked around to every department. As I explained why I was stopping by, everyone had the same reaction as soon as I mentioned the guy's name. "Oh gosh, what about this jerk?" I finished explaining how he was no longer a rewards member, and if he gives anyone issues, to call the front desk immediately, and his GM already probably tore him a new one just a minute ago. Everyone was so happy at this news. I finally went to the concierge room, used the guest's new key to void his current key, and then I walked into the room and explained the information to the evening concierge. She cringed at the mention of his name after explaining that she would not have to deal with him again and asked her to leave the morning person a note about this guy not allowed in the concierge room anymore. She was very happy. While I was gone, evidently the manager explained what we did to the 2 a.m. front desk ladies. The minute I got back to the desk, both my front desk coworkers all came up to me and gave me a huge hug and thanked me so many times. Manager to me after the other coworkers went home said, "Hey, do me a huge favor, please." I replied, "Yeah, sure, what's up?" Manager said, "If I ever tick you off, please come tell me so I can fix the issue." Later that night, Entitled Jerk comes to the desk, hat in hand, politely saying his key doesn't work. I replied, "Oh, so sorry about that. Let me make you a new key," in the best fake smile that I can muster. Aftermath. The next day, I check his rewards account and it is now suspended. I check back the next week. Sorry, account number not found. The beautiful thing about this, honestly, is that this guy was doing this across hotels around the United States nation, I don't know, and using the employee discount rewards, everything against what he was supposed to do. He got away with it. He was a good guy, right? Everybody thought he was cool, but everybody else hated dealing with him, actually. And then he finally, whenever somebody steps up to the plate and says, "Nah, enough is enough, man," they get him good and knock him out of the way. What a male Karen. Getting knocked down, the end of story. Way to go, OP. But I didn't retire, posted by Technogrind. My friend, I'll call her Sandy, worked at a travel agency in British Columbia, Canada. It was a small owner-operated business with the owner and 3 employees, including my friend. Everyone worked Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. One of my friend's co-workers, I'll call her Jane, an older woman in her early to mid-60s, was a long-time nuisance employee. Among other sketchy behavior, Jane was always scamming ways to take time off over and above her official paid vacation time. In order to make up for the lost hours, she would claim overtime hours and pay by supposedly going into the office in her off hours to finish up work without being requested by the owner to do so. Despite being caught in her own lies on a number of occasions and being warned about trying to claim for unsanctioned overtime, the owner of the travel agency was reluctant to officially reprimand Jane or to get rid of her. The reason being is the owner discovered after she had hired Jane that Jane had actually been fired from her previous job at another local travel agency for pulling the same stunts. However, Jane had sued her former employer for unfair dismissal and had won a settlement. After a few years of my friend Sandy working at the travel agency, the owner was ready to retire and offered to sell the business to my friend. Sandy took her up on the deal and took over the business while keeping on Jane and the other employee. Once again, just as the previous owner was afraid to get rid of Jane, so was Sandy for fear of being sued. When Sandy took over the business, she instituted guidelines regarding taking time off and she established an official no overtime policy. Jane would still try with her shenanigans, but was far less successful in getting what she wanted with my friend in charge. However, Jane still had one trick up her sleeve when she wanted to take time off on a whim. Sandy was a divorced single mom of 2 boys who were heavily involved in youth hockey. She would sometimes leave the office for an hour or 2 before closing to get her boys to hockey practice or a game. In order to avoid requesting in person and potentially being denied, Jane would wait for Sandy to be out of the office to book a day off if she didn't feel like coming into work or had made plans. Sandy would then arrive at work the next morning only to discover that Jane wasn't coming in. Despite this happening a number of times, Sandy would usually just let it slide since there was now a definite no overtime policy. Therefore, Jane could no longer claim to come into work on the weekend or after hours in order to try and make up for the day off. She would either miss out on a day's pay, in turn saving Sandy money as the owner, or it would come out of her remaining paid vacation days. Moreover, 2 people in the office at one time could usually handle everything. Jane not coming in was really a no-loss situation for Sandy. There was one time, however, when Sandy was going to be away for 1 or 2 work days just before the weekend to take her boys to a hockey tournament. She told both Jane and the other employee, both verbally and in writing, that they could not book time off for the dates in question, since she would be away and needed both of them in the office. Within a few days of giving this notice, Sandy went into the office on a Saturday to do some paperwork and go through sales for that week. This is when she discovered that, only the day before, Jane had booked a trip for her daughter and son-in-law to Las Vegas, as well as a plane ticket in her name to Calgary, where her daughter lived. Both the trip to Vegas and the ticket to Calgary coincided with the dates that Sandy would be out of the office. Sandy then checked the vacation booking schedule to further discover that Jane had indeed booked the days off that she had expressly been told she couldn't have. Not mentioning she had discovered the travel Jane had booked for herself and her daughter, Sandy emailed Jane telling her that she would have to deny her days off since she'd already been told they were unavailable because she, Sandy, would be away and needed Jane in the office. Through a continued series of email exchanges, Jane replied and outright lied to Sandy with some excuse about her daughter getting some long-awaited medical treatment or surgery, and she needed to go to Calgary to help out for a few days and look after her granddaughter. Sandy replied to this lie by telling Jane that she knew about the trip she had booked to Vegas for her daughter and son-in-law, that Jane's trip to Calgary was most likely to babysit her granddaughter while her daughter was in Vegas, and that she would still have to deny Jane the days off, especially since she booked them after being told they were unavailable. Jane countered in her subsequent reply without even addressing the fact that she had been caught in a lie, that she had been a dedicated employee of the travel agency for several years and couldn't understand why she was being treated so unfairly after all that she had done for the business. She then wrote that since she wasn't being treated as a valued employee, she had no choice but to retire and was giving her 2 weeks' notice. Despite Jane's threat, Sandy replied that she would still be unable to grant her the days off and left it at that without making any mention of Jane's threat to quit or retire. Sandy then contacted her accountant, who also acted as her de facto business advisor, and explained what had happened with Jane. Also aware of Jane's previous shenanigans, Sandy's accountant told her that this was the out that she had been looking for with Jane, and she had it all in writing. He told her that Jane had essentially resigned and retired, and all Sandy needed to do was honor Jane's desire to do so, let her finish out her 2 weeks, or pay her the 2 weeks' wages in lieu with no further severance pay legally required since she hadn't been fired. The following Monday, Sandy went into the office early, accompanied by her long-term boyfriend to act as a witness. She put Jane's belongings from her desk into a box and took the things that were property of the business. Since Jane was old school and had resisted inputting client information in the computer database, this also included a small box filled with index cards which had client phone numbers, addresses, credit card information, and other personal information noted on them. In the meantime, the other employee had arrived for work, and they all waited for Jane to show up. Jane arrived just before 9 o'clock, acting as though nothing had happened, and greeted everyone with a "good morning" as she walked through the door. However, she was apparently taken slightly aback when she noticed Sandy's boyfriend seated in the far corner of the office. At this point, Jane was midway to her desk when Sandy informed her that there was no need to go any further and that she had accepted Jane's notification of retirement. She then handed Jane a check compensating her for the hours she had worked in the current pay period, as well as 2 weeks' wages in lieu of Jane finishing out her final 2 weeks before her retirement. Jane was dumbfounded and went into panic mode. But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire." Sandy responded that indeed she had retired, given her notice, and had proof of it in writing. All Jane could do was continue repeating, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire," while unsuccessfully attempting to get the support of the other employee who refused to come to her defense. Sandy then pointed to the box containing Jane's belongings, wished her a happy retirement, and told her to leave the office. Jane quickly rifled through the box and noticed that the small box containing the index cards with the client information was not there. She insisted that Sandy return it to her, which Sandy refused to do, explaining that it was property of the business, contained personal client information, and that she would be in violation of Canadian privacy laws if she were to let Jane take it. Jane's shock had now turned to obstinance, and she refused to leave without the box. Both the other employee and Sandy's boyfriend had started to get involved, repeatedly telling Jane to just leave. Sandy then informed Jane that if she didn't leave, they would have to call the RCMP, which is Canadian police, at which point Sandy's boyfriend dialed 911 to inform the dispatcher of a disgruntled former employee at XYZ travel agency who was refusing to leave the premises. Within a few minutes, 2 police officers arrived, and Jane immediately ran to the door, ranting about being fired and about the missing box of client info. In order to de-escalate the situation, one police officer told Jane to come outside and explain to him her side of the story. The other officer remained in the office to hear Sandy's side of the story, agreeing that Jane was not legally entitled to the box of client info. The other officer then re-entered the business and told Jane to wait outside. He said that Jane was insisting that Sandy was holding onto her personal belongings, namely a box of important information. Both Sandy and the officer who had spoken to her explained the contents of the box to the other officer, who in turn agreed it was not Jane's property. The police officers then picked up the larger box of Jane's personal belongings, took it outside to see Jane, and told her that she needed to go home. To rub salt in Jane's wounds, the next day, Sandy put up a large sign in the window of the business, congratulating Jane on her retirement, and even put a small announcement in the local newspaper doing the same thing. The icing on the piece of revenge cake was Sandy, when filling out the necessary government forms for when an employee quits, gets fired, or retires, made sure to check the box labeled "retired" for the reason for Jane no longer being employed. By doing so, Jane was ineligible to collect unemployment insurance benefits. Oh, this right here is the best kind of pro-revenge in a way, because they dug their own grave. Okay, let's just put it that way, flat out, because Jane thought she had this plan, went in with this elaborate little scheme and thought she could get around, thought she was so smart, right? First of all, she was sneaking in vacation. She was used to doing it. She got by so long. Sandy comes in, says nope, and then has a super plan behind her back to not only make sure she stops working for her, but gets nailed for any kind of unemployment insurance benefits, because technically Jane retired. Let's be honest, she retired, right? Way to go, OP. Want some free gas? I gotcha, bro. Posted by Affectionate Gold 84. So several years ago, my friend, we'll call him Boris, and I would always help each other do the spring cleanup for our properties. This included taking out damaged trees, preparing garden plots, and taking care of our weed-infested yards. I was going to be first on the cleanup detail, so I prepared tools and implements the Friday before the big cleanup was to happen. Sharpening tools and chainsaw chains, lawnmower blades, and just getting everything in order. Among those tasks was mixing what we had with 2-cycle oil. Finished up kinda late and generally put things away for the next day. The next morning, Boris shows up with coffee and biscuits around 8 a.m. As we were sitting on his tailgate enjoying breakfast, my neighbors ride by in their beat-to-heck Chevy Cavalier, smoking like a freight train. We'll call them Rocky and Bullwinkle. Boris and I made the usual jokes about the amount of smoke pouring from the exhaust. Dang, bet they go to the gas station and fill up with oil and check the gas. We soon finished breakfast and thought no more about it. As we begin to get the tools laid out and hash out a plan of attack, I can't find my gas cans. No mixed gas, regular gas, or a gas can in general. That's when it dawned on us why the car Rocky and Bullwinkle were driving was smoking so bad. I am ticked, to say the least. Well, all Boris and I could do was go shopping for gas cans, gas, and more 2-cycle oil. After we returned, we saw Rocky and Bullwinkle pass by several times, but all in all, we got a lot done. The next weekend, we dedicated to clean up at Boris's. A weekend or two goes by, and we have a family dinner at my wife's, Rocky and Bullwinkle's grandparents'. Toward the latter part of the evening, we were having a few drinks. Most people had left, and myself and wife's grandfather were shooting the breeze when I had to take a leak. As I was doing so, I saw a gas can with a very distinct paint on it. I inquired from the old man about how it came into his possession, and he stated that Rocky and Bullwinkle left it there. I simply explained that it was mine, as was another, and loaded them in my truck. It ate at me every time that POS car with my neighbors went by. So I hatched a plan from a rotten egg. I went and bought a few gallons of gas, a few gallons of diesel fuel, and some other various oils. I made a concoction of these different chemicals and filled my new 6-gallon gas can that I had to purchase. With some clean gas, I filled a lawnmower and cut some grass that evening, making sure Rocky and Bullwinkle saw me. Then I put everything away, but forgot and left that rotten egg gas can out. I got up and went to work the next morning and didn't even think to check on the can. But when I got home, I checked and it was gone. My wife informed me that my plan must have worked as she watched Rocky and Bullwinkle go in and out with the car, not only smoking but spitting and sputtering as well. The last time they rode out, they didn't ride back in. They gave me about an hour of peace before they came over and wanted to know if I could look at their car and see what was wrong. If it could not be fixed on the side of the road, maybe tow it home. My response? I've had a long day and I have a migraine. Maybe tomorrow. I saw the panic set in when I told them that. That's when they told me that they had no insurance and it was on a main road. Tough luck. So the highway patrol did run across it and had it towed. It was going to cost them around $500 to get it out of impound, plus they had to have current registration and insurance. The car wasn't worth it. Well, they're those type of people that good luck just falls on them, and the pastor for a local church gave them an old Ford Taurus. Took me a few cans of rotten egg gas, but I got the motor to lock up after about a month. This time, it quit in their grandparents' yard, so they scrapped it, and as luck would have it, they got their income tax returns. They bought a nice-looking Ford F-150, but it began having problems too. Smoked really bad. They did take it to a mechanic that eventually found the problem. He got the truck running right again for about $1,500, and I have never had any more gas cans come up missing. You know, I really like these bait and switch pro revenges because they steal the thing and you're like, it's them, it's gotta be them. And then you put out a messed up thing, they take it too, mess themselves over, have to get a new car, pay money, get another new car, pay more money, and just end up screwing themselves up so hard without them wanting to come to you and explain what happened because you know they did it, they know they did it, but they don't know that you know they did it. It's kind of like when you have somebody steal your lunch and then you put like a super hot spicy version. They take that too and then they're coughing and hacking in the break room. You know it's them. Way to go, OP. Nice story. Revenge. Pro Revenge. Check out my next Pro Revenge compilation here to continue your listening session, and thank you so much for checking this one out.